Violent Hill. Number 5.
I decided to write this encounter because I was inspired by a post I saw online. The story happened 3 years ago and is an eerie experience I will never forget. It was late at night in our vacation cabin. I was staying the weekend with a group of my guy friends whom we all pitched in for a nice place. Our cabin was situated on a hill, the first floor door being the main entrance, and the basement door at the bottom of the hill. I was really enjoying myself on the basement floor, which was also a game room, drinking with my friends, playing foosball, and overall having a good time. It was past midnight when we heard strange shouting noises coming from outside. We found it odd because no one was around outside, and we thought it was the alcohol playing tricks on us. However, we speculated since we all heard something, that probably wasn't the case. So my friend decided to open the door. We were pretty rowdy inside, so I couldn't hear what happened, until my friend said, "Nah, we're good," and slammed the door shut and locked it. When we asked what happened, he told us a man was standing outside near the entrance and wanted to come in and have some fun with us. He mentioned he also saw the man had a deformed hand, like he was missing some fingers with blood trailing down from it. I was intrigued by this, so I decided to unlock the door and take a peek for myself. I didn't know what was going through my mind at the time, but I really wanted to know if what he was saying was true. Besides, I figured there's not much that could have happened since I was in a cabin full of guys. Plus, the alcohol in my system must have produced some liquid courage. When I looked outside and saw nobody, I thought he was just playing a trick on us. Nevertheless, I assumed that was the end of it until we all heard a commotion coming from upstairs. All of us in the basement then rushed to the stairs, to the first floor. Apparently, this same man ran to the first floor door and tried to get in through there, trying to get my other friends upstairs to let him in. By the time all of us from the basement reached the first floor, the commotion had ended. We asked the guys upstairs what had happened. One of our friends said something similar, that this man wanted to come in and party with us, missing limbs, bloody hand and all. A couple of guys and I went out and tried to find this man, but he simply disappeared. It was extremely dark where we were, and there was nothing surrounding our cabin besides the trees and our cars. We checked around the house, but we couldn't find anybody. We decided to let it pass since it was already so late into the night and thought it was nothing worth pursuing. When we woke up in the morning, we decided to look around again for clues outside the house to figure out what had happened. Of course, we didn't find the man, but what we did find was the house completely surrounded by blood.
Number 4.
One day, my parents weren't home, so it was just my sister and I. We were doing schoolwork, and we were homeschooled. I don't remember exactly how old we were at the time, but I do know what class program I was doing. So I was anywhere from the 3rd to 5th grade, and my sister is 3 years older than me. We were sitting in the dining room, on our computers, doing schoolwork, like we always did. One of us was sitting facing the window, and one of us was sitting across the table with our back to the window. Then these two huge guys walked up to our porch, which is what the window faced. I distinctly remember them being tall, very husky guys, wearing black suit shirts and black slacks. One of the men had a neon pink silk tie, and the other had a neon green one. My sister and I still argue about whether or not they were black or Hispanic, but either way, they had darker skin. One of them was darker than the other, though. The darker-skinned one had a shaved head, and the lighter one had black hair, kind of slicked back. They were holding clipboards, but I'm not sure what was on them. As soon as they reached the door, they pounded on it. Like policeman style pounding on it. I've always been a very skittish person anyways, afraid of my own shadow, so that alone terrified me. They kept pounding and ringing the doorbell. This went on for more than a few minutes. Then one of them looked into the window, like hands over their eyebrows, touching the window looking in. The blinds were open, so they saw us staring right back at them. The darker-skinned guy then decided to try and look through the window too, and then started knocking on the window. He knocked on the window and yelled,
"Hey girls, don't worry, just open the door."
I was shaking in my chair. I was terrified of kidnappers and burglars, and as far as I knew, I was staring one right in the face. Thankfully, my sister walked over to the window and closed the blinds, grabbed the phone, and called my grandparents, who lived right across the street. They left after that. I have no idea what they wanted, or if their intentions were innocent or not. But that is not how you approach two young girls. For years after that, I was petrified of somebody knocking at the door, or strangers in general. Whoever they were, I'd really rather not meet them again.
Number 3.
This story happened back in the late 90s, when I was in 2nd grade. At the time, my uncle, my mom's younger brother, was enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Due to the nature of his job, he constantly traveled, and to other parts of the world. He was frequently stationed in different countries, sometimes for years at a time. Since he was usually so far away, my family did not get to see him very often. My mother and him were very close, and I had a special relationship with him as well. Every time he visited to a new place, he would send me a gift, a magic lamp from Saudi Arabia, castanets from Spain, rosary beads from Notre Dame, and so on. He was always a lot of fun, and I treasured the time that we spent together. This particular year, he received some time off, and informed us he would come to stay with us for the holidays. I was beyond thrilled to be seeing one of my favorite relatives. One day, while both of my parents were at work, he decided to take my brother and I to a nearby mall. At the time, my brother was 12 and I was 7. We had a good time, going to various stores, getting lunch, and watching skateboarders at the indoor park. Although my uncle loved us dearly, I wouldn't exactly call him the most attentive babysitter. While the three of us were heading out, my brother and uncle were much farther ahead of me. Both of them walked extremely fast and seemed to be engaged in their conversation. Being a very small girl for my age, combined with having Lyme disease, made it difficult for me to walk at their pace. As hard as I tried to catch up with them, I only seemed to be falling further and further behind. Suddenly, from the left side, I felt someone grab me. It happened in an instant, and my mind raced while trying to process what was happening. Looking up, I saw him, a face that I recall as clear as day, 20 years later. He was an old man, perhaps late 70s, but his face was horribly disfigured. All of his skin hung low and poured over his other features. What I remember most was his nose, which was more of a giant tumor, so large that it covered his entire mouth. Looking back, it is clear now that he had elephant man disease. The man did not say anything to me. Instead, he crouched down to my level and put his face just inches in front of mine. Then he made the most intense eye contact I have ever experienced. Both of his hands were wrapped around my arms so tightly that I winced in pain. Abruptly, he began shaking me, as if forcing me to look at him. I was so paralyzed in fear, I could not make a sound. For some reason, I simply stood there frozen, staring directly at him. While this was happening, the mall was by no means empty. People passed by, they either didn't notice or didn't care. After about a minute, which seemed far longer, adrenaline got the better of me and I violently wriggled from his grip. In tears, I moved as briskly as I could towards my uncle and brother. Luckily, the man did not follow me. By this time, my family members had finally realized I was gone, and both turned around while I approached them. Their backs were to me, and during the entire encounter, they had no idea what just occurred. I didn't say anything to either of them, because I was afraid somehow I had done something wrong. When I was home, I had bruises from where the man had grabbed me. I hid them from my mom so I didn't have to explain what had happened. The incident left me so traumatized. The very same night, I went vegetarian. In my 7-year-old mind, every time I looked at meat, I would think of that man's face and the way he had stared so intently at me. I would have nightmares that he was coming back for me, and I was so petrified to go back to them all for many, many years. Now that I'm an adult, I look back and I wonder what exactly transpired. Do you think he wanted to kidnap me? Was he tired of being ignored by society? Perhaps he had dementia. I will never know. Even though I have empathy and wish him well, I also take solace in the fact that we will probably never meet again.
Number 2.
So just as some background, I'm a male and currently 25 years old and still living within about 15 miles of my old house. This happened when I was around 8 or 9, making my sister at the time around 5 or 6. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that I once grew up in. I found out it was actually a lower income part of town. However, we had some wonderful neighbors, and it was thanks to these neighbors that a lot of potentially negative situations were avoided. At the time, my dad was working a 12-hour shift job, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and my mother was a secretary at the hospital, which meant during the day she was often at work. Usually my sister and I had a babysitter, but once I reached about 8 years old, I began to be old enough to look out for us without a babysitter. Now, mind you, this was the 90s, which certainly were not safe, but much safer than they are now. Also, we had the previously mentioned neighbors who generally did do a good job of keeping an eye on us and our house while our parents were away. This particular incident was one of the very first times I was charged to babysit my little sister. She was in her high chair, eating whatever my mom had left out for us at the time. All of a sudden, I got a knock on our front door. Now, this was strange, since we never got visitors on a regular basis, other than the boy across the street, who would want us to come out and play, but he usually yelled my name while knocking. I was young and naive, and I decided to open the door. Now, mind you, there was a locked screen door beyond that. I left that closed and locked. Outside was a middle-aged man. I can hardly remember his facial features or even his body type for that matter anymore. I just remember his yellow shirt and dirty jeans.
Can I help you?
I asked innocently. No alarm bells going off in my head yet at this point.
Oh, hey there. Are your parents home?
Alright, that was the first alarm bell. The thought of my parents teaching me not to trust strangers rushed through my head, but I still didn't quite fully grasp the potential danger here.
My mom went to the store, and she'll be back any minute now.
A weird half-lie. I could have said she was here, but in the shower, or that she was laying down upstairs. I'm glad that I didn't tell him, though, that she wouldn't be back for quite a few hours. But looking back, it's kind of scary how naive I was at the time.
Well, that's no problem. Hey, look, my dog went missing, and I think it went into your backyard. Do you mind if I come in and we can go check it out?
Okay, so I may have been dumb, but I wasn't that dumb. There was no way in hell I was letting the stranger into my house, especially with my sister in there. She was my first thought. Sure, I didn't want to have any harm fall on myself, but she was my sister, and it was my job to keep her safe. I should have closed the door right then and there. But once again, I went with a less safe, but still not totally stupid route.
Well, the gate should be unlocked, so if you want to go check the backyard, you can go do that.
Right after I said that, I very promptly closed the door. Now, of course, I was very curious if there was actually a stray dog in my backyard. I mean, dogs are great, right? Even with the weird guy being around, I was pretty interested to see how his search in the backyard went, so I decided to go to the back of the house and look out the window to see if there actually was a dog in our yard, and if so, if the man could actually catch it. Now at this point, I'm sure that you've figured out that there was no dog, and when I looked out the back window, I could almost see the entire yard, including the gate. The man wasn't there. This was mere seconds after I had closed the door on him. I waited for a few minutes, but he never showed up. After about 5 minutes, there was another knock on my door. This time, I was much more wary of the situation, and I didn't like this guy showing up. I was pretty tired of the whole ordeal, but I still hadn't fully taken in the situation. I kept the chain lock on the door and, once again, cracked it open.
So, did you find your dog?
No, I looked all over the yard and I couldn't find him. I have a picture of him in my car if you want to take it, just in case you see him.
Nope, no more. I still didn't understand abduction, but I was certainly not going anywhere outside of the house with this stranger. I told him that he can leave a picture in the mailbox and we'll keep an eye out, once again promptly closing the door. What followed is what really creeps me out to this day. Looking back, I was freaked out that I had come that close to exposing my sister and myself to danger. But admittedly, this scared the shit out of me. Suddenly, there was more knocking on my door. Not the screen door separating the door itself. Like I mentioned previously, the screen door was locked, and unless that was open, it was impossible to knock on the door itself. It freaked me the fuck out. I took my sister to my bedroom and crept back out to the kitchen, where I could see onto the front yard, and I saw the man quickly getting back into his car. Well, my saint of a next-door neighbor, Joan, stood on her front lawn smoking a cigarette and watching him very intently. It took a long time for me to add it all up, and honestly, I had forgotten about it for a long time. When I finally remembered it all, I couldn't even believe my own memories. I am still debating with myself to actually tell my parents now. I wouldn't want to unnecessarily upset them. But maybe it's an important story to tell my two younger sisters, one of whom is getting married soon, just as a life lesson. Either way, Mr. Yellow-Shirted Man, let's never meet again. Also, thank you to Joan wherever you are. You saved me on multiple occasions, and I don't think you ever even knew it. Also, I forgot to mention this. I had found out later that he had ripped a corner of the screen door and unlocked the screen door that way. My dad later just thought it was wear and tear, or us kids being kids, but pretty creepy looking back on it.
Number
1. This is something that happened when I was no more than 8 years old. As a child, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's. The reason why I can't really say. Maybe I liked her house and food better. My grandma had these other two female friends that would come over every weekend, and they would sit, drink wine, and gossip about other people. Next door to her was a middle-aged man that lived with his mother, sister, and 2 brothers. They all lived together, and all of them were odd and mean except for the middle-aged man. Henry was his name. He was odd, but nice and very quiet. And while my grandma and the ladies would sit and talk in the dining room, he would just sit on the sofa and watch TV with me. He always seemed like a pretty nice guy overall. One weekend, the ladies were sitting and sipping their wine as usual, and Henry watching TV with me, as usual. One of my grandmother's friends, I'd rather not put her name here because, well, she is dead now, due to what I'm about to tell you in this story. She was drunk and rambling about how she can't stand that motherfucker, Grandma and her other friend was telling her to calm down. I wasn't really thinking much of it because she was pretty well known to drink a little too much and run off at the mouth. She stands up and says, "I can't be around him. Let me go home before I do something." She starts quickly stomping towards the door, and then all of a sudden turns around and puts out a lit cigarette on Henry's head. Henry then jumps up, runs past me, and grabs my grandma's friend to toss her against the wall. I see the picture frames and all kinds of other stuff being smashed all over Henry's head. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly just happened. Henry stepped back from her, and I see a knife, covered in blood. My grandmother's friend, standing against the wall, looking and holding her stomach. My grandma and her friend is screaming at Henry to get out. Right before my grandmother grabbed me and tried to cover my eyes, I happened to glance at my grandmother's friend's stomach, and I saw all of her insides hanging down. Sorry for the gruesome details, but that's what I saw. After that night, I heard nothing else about what happened. I just know I didn't see Henry for years. My parents ended up moving to a new neighborhood a few years later, and our next door neighbor just happened to be the normal sister of Henry, one that I never met before. It is possible that I could have seen her around before, being that we lived in such a small country town in Alabama. Henry was living with her. I always saw him doing something odd. He would walk the street every day with a chopped off wooden brown stick with a nail in the bottom. And whenever I was outside, he would speak and call me by my name like nothing had ever happened. He acted like he didn't damn near murder a lady right in front of me. The crazy thing to the story is, in high school, I actually ended up dating his niece, one that was related by birth, by the normal side of the family.